Good evening, welcome to the show. I'm Steve Price filling in for Andrew. Andrew, of course, will be back with us in the new year. Now, breaking news as we go to air tonight, we are, like the rest of the country, keeping an eye on this tropical cyclone Jasper. Now, it apparently has made landfall in the last 10 or 15 minutes and all hell has broken loose in far north Queensland. We'll take you there live shortly and find out exactly how bad it is. Now, coming up, global calls for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza are gaining traction, with Australia and New Zealand and Canada joining forces. I'll talk to my panel about that and the fact that Australia, it seems, is now out of step, largely out of step, with our oldest ally, the United States. Also tonight, media writer from The Australian and Sky contributor Sophie Ellsworth, she's got some breaking news about James Packer's return to the Australian media. That's fascinating in itself. Test batsman Usman Khawaja, now he's learnt the hard way that sport and politics don't mix. He's been forced to abandon his plans for an on-field protest over the Israel-Hamas war. He's just spoken. We'll bring you what he has to say a little later in the program. Plus, for the first time, leaders at the climate conference COP28, they have voted to explicitly move away from fossil fuels. The boss to help explain, I'll have Ross Greenwood as well to help explain my EFO in just a few moments. But if I could be bold enough to suggest, most Australians would have no idea what that acronym even means, let alone would they have had time to sit down today and hear what the Treasurer Jim Chalmers had to say. Now, my EFO actually stands for Mid-Year Economic and Fiscal Outlook. What the update didn't do today, though, is offer those millions of Australians, many of them watching us tonight, hard slaving away at work today, any cost of living relief. Nothing there, nothing at all. No cut in the cost of crippling petrol prices, even though an excise call for 6 months in the midst of all the billions being spent, it would have been easy, simple and relatively cheap. A Christmas boost for all of us. But no, the government didn't want to do it. Why not? Well, the cynic in me would suggest the political timing would not have been to Labor's advantage and even might impact on their chances of re-election. Now, Australia's wealthiest woman, she's pretty smart, Gina Rinehart, she's called for that petrol excise relief, and she even went further, calling for council rate freezes. That would also, to me, make sense. I can't recall in recent history a more financially stressed population than right now. Food prices, mortgage pain, those petrol prices, they're down a bit, and of course energy and utility prices. Now, have you looked at your gas bill or your water bill or your electricity bill lately? What happens during Christmas and holidays? You use more of all of those things, including fuel. Disposable income numbers show all developed nations, Australians lead the way in simply stopping spending on anything that's not a necessity. We all have to buy fuel, we have to buy food, we have to pay bills. But imagine what this collapse in non-essential spending is actually doing to retail businesses. I think there's a bad story around the corner. It's clearly easier in opposition, but I reckon the Coalition's finance spokeswoman Jane Hume nailed it today.
Australians are facing a really tough Christmas. They're going to have to make some big decisions about their own family budgets. It's a real shame that this Labor government has failed to make decisions, those tough decisions around theirs.
Well said, and as she says, the government doesn't help you with your budget and continues to blow its own, led by state Labor governments who spend like drunken sailors. Take Victoria, where the new Premier Jacinta Allan yesterday, incredibly, formally signed up contracts for the despised suburban rail loop, being built at a massive cost, connecting the wrong suburbs in the wrong place. They're not even being built where the population is increasing. Now, we'll dig into the detail with Ross Greenwood up next. Well, let's get straight to the news of the day. As I said at the beginning of the program, the government has now handed down its mid-year economic and fiscal outlook. We had the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, and I don't know that he should have been smiling through his media conference, spinning what seems to be a web of slogans and catchphrases. Have a look.
Responsible economic management, it's what puts downward pressure on inflation and eases the cost of living. And because of our efforts, we are getting the budget in much better nick and making more room for our priorities, and that's what these numbers that we are releasing today show. Our government's economic plan is at its core about three things: easing cost of living pressures, repairing the budget and investing in the foundations of growth in our economy.
Well, I didn't hear much about easing cost of living pressures, I must say. The reality is that Australia, of course, is in probably a per capita recession. Households are in a lot of pain as we get toward Christmas. Inflation is still very high, despite those 13 rate increases. Joining me now is Sky News business editor Ross Greenwood. Ross, you know this stuff much better than me. Is it naive to have expected any sort of financial relief for Australian taxpayers from today?
I think it probably is, because it's probably not the time that the government wants to do it. It probably wants to do it closer to an election or closer to the budget next year. And also, it's got time to have a little bit of a look to see just whether inflation, which is moderating now, is going to come down much. But you're right, families are hurting. And the problem is, in many ways, that this particular budget shows that if the government had gone out and spent earlier, it probably would have only added to inflation, which therefore would have probably left interest rates higher for longer, or indeed higher than what they are now. And that's something they simply couldn't have chanced. And that's partly what the Treasurer was saying today, that if they had not taken the action that they had done and really banked a lot of the money that's coming through from PAYE taxpayers right now, that ultimately they'd be right now facing higher interest rates, and Australia would have been facing the prospect economically of a much harder economic landing as well.
That, cash that's pouring into Treasury from income tax takes from Australians, the estimates from Treasury on what that would be were way out. Is that a concern?
Yeah, well, that's because they underestimated where the unemployment rate would be, just how low it would go and how long it would stay there. And so if we go through some of the numbers here, you can even see now that the government is more pessimistic about where unemployment lands as compared with the Reserve Bank. It says broadly it's going to be between 1.25% higher over the next couple of years. Now, the reality is, when you actually come down and look at that in the number of people who will be out of work. Now, first off, June 30 next year, it's around 80,000 people more than today out of work. Now, if you think there's economic hurt right now, then if you put 80,000 people out of the workforce, and that's all other things being equal, including no more migration, all that type of thing, but if it's 80,000 more people, then there is significant hurt when people can't pay mortgages, when they can't pay their bills. But then you go out to the following year and you get the more than 110,000 people at that time who will be out of work by that time. So, what really you're seeing is that the pain that you might be feeling right now is only just starting as a result of these rate rises. And that's the reason why the government needs to basically keep some money up its sleeve, and even potentially those stage 3 tax cuts, to make certain that there is some genuine relief coming down the track for those people who lose jobs over the next 12 to 18 months or so.
Ross, I saw you highlight some discretionary spending figures today, which shows that discretionary spending has basically collapsed. Now, when you look at that, and you can understand it with, high petrol prices and the cost of food and electricity and gas, but that must be having a major impact on small business, particularly retail. Are we going to see post-Christmas and into the next year a lot of businesses, medium and small, falling over?
Almost certainly. There's little doubt about that. And though they might have had something of a windfall during that Black Friday sales, where the sales that's reported to us were much stronger than last year, going into Christmas, things do look a bit weaker. And you can see the consumer confidence is at its lowest level it's been in decades. So that being the case, people are not prepared to spend. Now, they've got to spend on essentials. There's no doubt they'll keep on trying to keep the lights on, do all that sort of stuff. But it is going to be the discretionary spending that comes into question into the new year. And especially as some people start to get worried about jobs. The problem, as you point out, if small business is going to the wall, then people are losing jobs. If people are losing jobs, then people are not being able to keep up with mortgages and other bills that they might have. And so the real issue is, even though the government is forecasting a very wafer-thin deficit of $1.1 billion, it's a rounding error, really. It could be in surplus, if they'd been able to find an extra coin down the back of the couch. The truth is that by the middle of next year and beyond, they're going to need every dollar that they can get, because A, they're not going to be getting as much money through from the PAYG taxpayers, who represent now almost half of all the money they get. But then secondly, they're going to have to be paying out unemployment benefits to people who need to go on welfare as they lose jobs. And that really, if you like, is the worst recipe for any government. And that's what Jim Chalmers is going to be facing by the by this time next year, and certainly by that time, there's going to be talk about falling interest rates, not rising interest rates.
Is there a definition of discretionary spending? The reason I ask that rather odd question is you fly on a plane and it's full domestically. You go out to a pub or a restaurant, you can barely get in and get a booking. People seem to be out spending money on that sort of thing. What are they not spending money on? I mean, we're talking furniture retailers, white goods, I mean, the Jerry Harveys of this world, the people selling lounge suites. What is it?
It's that. There's no doubt. It's some of that discretionary spending on white goods, electronic gear and stuff like that. But rather than trying to think about it of categories that people are spending on or not spending on, think about the people or the community as being like an onion. So at the very heart, the very core, people who are very wealthy are still spending up on big mansions. They're still spending up on luxury goods. Luxury goods sales are very strong in Australia right now. The problem is when you get out towards the core, in other words, almost to the edge of our suburbs and our capital cities, it's where people have only one job and they're trying to support a family. It's where they've suddenly found themselves after all these rate rises, plus the rise in their energy prices, plus the rise in their supermarket bills, that they're the ones who are genuinely hanging on, and especially those people who have bought homes over the past 2 or 3 years and taken on relatively very big mortgages compared with their wages. Now, even though they're the outer layer of the onion, you can't discard them. You can't just let them go because, as I say, it really is very much not even a two-speed economy. It's a multi-layered economy right now. But at the very heart, there's still people out there spending and consuming. And oddly enough, those people are still driving up inflation, which the people at the outer edges are feeling most acutely when it comes to the rate rises and their own cost of living. And they're the people who are also vulnerable to losing jobs and therefore really becoming a catastrophe for property markets and for the Australian economy.
Just finally and quickly, what's your view on the fuel excise argument about how the government could have, over the next 6-month period, knocked a bit of that excise off and made petrol a bit cheaper?
I think that's a fallacy. The oil price is coming down anyway as it is. And so from that point of view, petrol prices will come down so long as the government can make certain that there's enough competition between the oil companies. When you've got oil today in the 60s, when it was at one stage up close to $90 just only about a month and a half ago, those petrol prices are going to come down. The government doesn't need to do it because politically, if you take it off at some stage in the future, you might just have to put it back on again. And that politically does not suit anybody. So that's the reason why I'd suggest that the government right now is going to resist those calls and let the markets do its jobs.
Ross Greenwood, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure, mate. Thanks.
Good on you, Steve.
Now, before we head to our panel, we'll get to them in a sec. I need to take you up to far north Queensland, Cairns. Now, we're told Cyclone Jasper is making landfall as we speak. Sky News weather meteorologist Bradlyn Oakes is in Cairns as this happens. How bad's it got so far?
Well, we have seen very hazardous conditions already. Many areas of Cairns have seen over 50 millimetres fall since 9 a.m. this morning. We're expecting a huge amount of heavy rainfall heading through the coming hours. Other areas of far north Queensland have reported totals over 100, 150 millimetres so far. You can see the wind and rain that is occurring all around me. Currently, conditions are deteriorating very, very quickly. Now, Tropical Cyclone Jasper is currently at a Category 2, and it is making landfall as we speak. Now, this is going to bring damaging to destructive winds. We are watching for gusts to pick up to 100, 120, 140 kilometres per hour throughout far north Queensland. We're also watching for those totals in terms of precipitation to just continue to increase. Localized areas could see 200 to 300 millimetres falling in a 6-hour period. So this could lead to life-threatening flash flooding. We've seen storm surges in more coastal areas, high waves and swells. Now, 15,000 people in far north Queensland are without power currently, and crews cannot repair that. Because of the emergency situation, many communities and cities, including Cairns, are currently under an emergency alert. We got that notice earlier this afternoon to seek shelter in the strongest part of your building, whether that's a hotel or your house or wherever you happen to be. So very dangerous conditions. Police are out on the road making sure that people are seeking shelter and staying safe. And emergency services have over 100 people out throughout far north Queensland that are stationed at various different areas to assist when necessary, especially over the next few hours as we do watch Jasper make landfall. That's when we're going to see some of the most hazardous conditions before it diminishes, but we will see the remnants of this continuing through tomorrow and into Friday.
Bradlin, I know communication's a little bit difficult, but there was some uncertainty about where exactly Jasper would make landfall. Now, you've got a huge area from Cooktown in the far north all the way down to Port Douglas and even down to Cairns and beyond to Townsville. Do we know yet where exactly it might make land or where it has made land at the moment?
Well, currently it is making landfall and starting to make landfall around Wujal. So that's really where we're seeing the center and where the eye is likely to pass over. And it has been one of those changing systems hour by hour over the last couple of days. We've been tracking it really on a every 10-minute basis, making sure that we were seeing what the latest conditions were and what the latest modeling was. But there were so many variables as it tracked through, including intensity and track, that we were watching. And we saw it at a Category 1 earlier today, but it's making landfall as a Category 2 as expected.
What sort of wind speeds are we talking about right now?
Well, in Cairns today, we have seen the peak wind gusts at about 82 kilometers per hour. Currently, we're seeing gusts at about 65 to 70 kilometers per hour, but other areas are seeing gusts over 100 or 120 kilometers per hour. And we're watching for destructive winds, especially on the south side of the system over the next few hours. And those could be gusts to 120 or 130 or 140 kilometers per hour. In Cairns, we've seen trees already down, same with Port Douglas. Fences have been brought down. There is damage to property, so it's already an intense system and it's just really starting to make landfall.
Let's hope everyone stays safe. Bradlin, thanks for the update. You keep safe yourself. That's far north Queensland. We'll keep an eye on that as we go through the program. Now, let's bring in our panel straight in. Joining me tonight, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer Michael Costa and Liberal MP Garth Hamilton. Can we talk about some breaking news, you two? It's just come into us in the last 10 minutes or so. It seems there's been a back down of sort for the first time. I'm talking COP here. For the first time explicitly, it seems, I'll go to you first, Michael. Leaders at COP28 have agreed to, quote, transition away from fossil fuels. This is the second draft text. It's just been released and it says it's calling for countries to transition away from fossil fuel in energy systems in a just, orderly and equitable manner, accelerating action this decade. Man, it's very much language talking around the problem. What do you make of that, Michael? I mean, try and unpick it for me.
Oh, look, Steve, I think that's just nonsense. It's just a motherhood statement. What is the meaning of that? What the fanatics wanted, the climate change hysterics wanted, was a firmer statement from all of the participants that fossil fuels would be almost eliminated almost immediately, and that's not what they've got. That's just a motherhood statement. It could be read any way you want. All that stuff about justice and all that sort of stuff is just meaningless. Look, that whole thing's been a fiasco. And we look stupid thanks to our energy minister being over there. And I'm not talking about that embarrassing welcome to country. I'm talking about the fact that our economy, and we've just had the MYEFO released, shows how dependent we are on these fossil fuels. And there's no way in the world that we will be in a position over the next decade to do anything like what's implied in that statement. So it's just nonsense. And I'm sure people will be walking it back as soon as they leave.
Garth, I mean, from a Queensland point of view, I mean, I guess this is better news because, you know, the strident language coming out of the zealots through this conference has been unbelievable. But at the end of the day, when they had to put out their communique and put it in writing, they've sort of gone, oh, well, you know, maybe we've gone a bit hard.
They went weak at the knees. Look, firstly, I'm looking forward to seeing these people walk or swim home from Dubai, to immediately get out of fossil fuels. You know, that'd be a great show of support and strength for their wonderful cause. But what a silly statement. I mean, can we just point out now, COP is meaningless. It is absolutely meaningless. We're in a cost of living crisis that is affecting all Australians. Energy prices are soaring. And despite having some of the highest uptake of solar energy in the world, particularly on homes and houses, our prices are still through the roof. If it was cheaper, it would be working. This is not about what's affecting the average mum or dad around the kitchen table, or particularly young Australians hoping to get onto the housing ladder. This is completely, self-absorbed, elitist. Has nothing to do with the real world. And I'm glad, if I can say one good thing about this, I'm glad I'm not there.
Garth, I mean, when you look at it, how foolish to hold a climate change gathering of where apparently 100,000 people turned up in the middle of the UAE, which pumps oil out of the sand, turns it into petrol. It's a fossil fuel. Who thought that was a good idea?
Look, it's the ultimate rebrand, isn't it? You know, the gritty reboot of the Middle East, that they care about these sort of things. I lived over there and worked over there for quite a number of years. I remember driving through the deserts, seeing the smoke billowing out into the sky, the desalination plants pumping brine out and killing fish in the Red Sea. I can remember these things. The pretense that there's some sort of new green world going on over there. It is pretense. And I think we just need to come back to what sensible policy we can, which is ensuring that we have cheap and reliable power for Australians to use and for our economy to get ahead.
Michael Costa, you were a brilliant New South Wales Treasurer in your day. You brought down budgets. How do you think Jim Chalmers is going at the moment? How ambitious do you reckon he is?
Not very ambitious at all. It's all luck at the moment. Look, this statement's just full of smoke and mirrors again. I mean, if you actually look at the things that the government has done to do anything with that surplus, it's basically the immigration program, and that's got a massive negative for everybody in the community. I mean, the two key factors, of course, are commodity prices. They're estimating that coal and iron ore are going to be half the value that they are currently next year. That's so they can announce on budget night a big surplus and say how wonderful they are. But you looked at tax take, it's just staggering. And that's, again, driven by the lack of the government cutting back its cost base, but more importantly by the immigration program, and that's the reason they're addicted to it. They're talking about a $65 billion increase over the forward estimates. That's just staggering. In this year alone, they're talking about $20 billion in between corporate and pay-as-you-go tax. It's just extraordinary. And if you actually look at the cost-cutting measures, they're not there. The NDIS, they squibbed it. They basically set up a second honey pot with the states, and you're going to see that blow out over the next decade for sure as people work out how they can get that money. And the only costs that they really did cut were infrastructure, which we need to support our cities that have got, 1.5 million new people coming in over the next 4 or 5 years. It's just extraordinary. And remember, the debt is still heading towards $1 trillion. So, you'd probably give him a C. At least he's tried to pretend he's got a surplus.
Garth, I mean, just talking to Ross Greenwood there, and he described, Australia and the economy as an onion, and that the people are really doing it hard are those who are on the fringes of our major capital cities, whether it be Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne. What anecdotally are you hearing about how hard people in your electorate, for example, are doing it on cost of living?
Look, the stories that always hit me the hardest are the young Australians in their 20s trying to imagine a way that they can get a house, that they can just buy a house, have that part of the Australian dream. They're paying rent at the moment, rent's through the roof. That's if they can find somewhere to rent and they're not living at their parents'. The cost of everything is through the roof. They've got no ability to save, no bank wants to talk to them. And they're competing with 500,000 new Australians in the last 12 months to get into the housing market. It's heartbreaking because I think that's the formative part of your years. That's the formative part of how we build this nation. We create homes for people in whatever shape they may be. But that's how we pass on our traditions and our values. And to watch people see that Australian dream slip away from them, it's devastating.
Michael, I think we were pretty surprised this morning when we learned that the Albanese government has changed its stance on Israel today. They've had our ambassador to the UN put his hand up and vote for the UN's resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Here's what the ambassador said. I saw it on Sky this morning.
In defending itself, Israel must respect international law, including international humanitarian law. Civilians and civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, must be protected. Hamas must be defeated and dismantled, but this cannot be without account for the protection and welfare of Palestinian civilians. President, Australia supports Palestinians' right to self-determination.
Michael, we also signed a statement with New Zealand and Canada defending Israel's right to defend itself and calling for the disarming of Hamas, but calling for a ceasefire. I mean, and we've walked away from our biggest ally, the Americans.
Yeah, it's disgraceful. And it is about internal ALP politics, and it's about seats in Western Sydney, unfortunately. And I think it's a foolish position for them to have taken. I mean, the fact of the matter is we just voted with places like Syria, who's killing all of their civilian populations indiscriminately, allegedly with chemical weapons, and Russia, that's invaded Ukraine. I mean, they supported this resolution calling for humanitarian care and, a ceasefire. I don't see any ceasefire in Russia. So the fact that we've aligned ourselves with these people instead of the US is absolutely a disgrace. It's actually grotesque when you think about it. The bottom line is it undermines Israel's ability to finish this war quickly. The call for a ceasefire is one that's not respected by Hamas. We already saw that, and nor should we even entail supporting anything that would give them comfort. The bottom line is Israel's got to continue, and yes, it's got to make sure it abides by international law, and I think it is doing that. They're going to pains to make sure that they do that. But the civilians and Hamas are intertwined, and that's unfortunate, and that's the reality.
Garth, were you surprised that Labor went this direction, or do you agree with Michael that this is more about domestic politics and saving seats in places like Western Sydney?
Well, I guess I'm surprised to find that our Prime Minister is weaker than Joe Biden. That's what he's proven himself, chasing these far-left votes rather than standing firm for what should be seen as one of Western democracy's greatest legacies. Israel is something that we, as Australians, have played our small part in, and so we should be a country we should be very proud to stand beside. I think it's incredible that we're trying to draw parallels between a terrorist organisation and a Western democracy when it's been very clear Israel has held a two-state solution out for a very, very long time. Hamas does not. Hamas does not want to recognise Israel. It does not want to take part in a two-state solution. We have one side that it makes every effort to abide by its obligations. We have another side that committed the sort of atrocities, and I put this to you, Steve, if those atrocities that we saw in Israel were committed against Australians, do you think you'd care what another country thought as we did whatever it took to ensure that those atrocities would not happen again? I don't think I'd be very interested. Israel have made their terms clear. They want the hostages released, they want Hamas to surrender, and that's the terms of the ceasefire that they seek. I think we should be supporting our allies.
Yeah, well said. I agree with you completely. Michael Costa, Garth Hamilton, thank you very much for your time this evening. Now, coming up after the break, we will talk with Sophie Ellsworth, the media writer from The Australian. Apparently, James Packer has made a return to the Australian media. He's invested in Channel 10. Sophie Ellsworth with us next. Welcome back. There's been a development on the story of Usman Khawaja and the messages that he had written on his cricket boots. We'll get to that shortly. But breaking news this afternoon, which I think surprised a lot of people, particularly people in the media, Australian billionaire James Packer looks like returning to the media sector. Now, he's reportedly bought up a $122 million stake in the international entertainment giant Paramount Global. Now, Paramount Plus, Paramount Global owns Australia's Network 10. Joining us now to discuss this is the Australian's media writer, Sophie Ellsworth. It's almost back to the future for James.
Isn't it interesting, Steve? Because we know that he had a significant stake in 10 just over a decade ago.
2010, yeah.
2010, yep. And you're right. It's like he's gone back to what was. So it is back to the future. And interesting because he's been pretty low-key in recent years. We haven't heard a lot about him. So this story was broken on The Australian this afternoon. I think a lot of people will be interested at where he's putting his money again.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things about James Packer going anywhere near media is he walked away from it completely. I mean, back when he sold the Nine Network, he did a genius deal. He sold it at the top of the market, and the people who bought it have just not been able to do as well out of it as what he did. So he's a very clever bloke. So maybe he thinks Channel 10 is a bit of a bargain at the moment. I would be surprised if he went in there boots and all and decided to buy the whole thing, but who knows?
Well, that's right, Steve. And look, I know that you are on the project, so but just with 10 itself, we can't deny, and I'll say this, it might make it a bit awkward for you, Steve, but 10 have had their woes. I mean, their ratings are down. They've had many issues. They're obviously going through court now with the Lisa Wilkinson case. So it hasn't been smooth sailing for 10. So this will be really interesting to see what impact this does have.
So also this afternoon it was reported that he's involved in a company that now owns Crown Casino. Now, the way he can buy all of these new assets, and there was a list of them in that report in The Australian this afternoon, is that he sold Crown Casino for a lot of money.
That's right. So again, he's going back to what he knows. Now, this is in Blackstone, who are the new owner of Crown. So he's gone back and invested in them. So this is really interesting, Steve. I wonder what this means big picture, but it is very, interesting that James Packer is back in the headlines because, as I said, he hasn't been in the headlines. He's been sort of a bit out of it for quite a while.
Look, I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but there was a story earlier in the week that he has parted company with a lot of long-term advisors. Yeah. Now, whether those long-term advisors put him into these new assets or whether he's got someone else advising him, I don't know. Let's turn our attention to my favourite subject, the ABC, talking about people who don't rate. Their radio assets are in all sorts of trouble. Their ratings on Metropolitan Radio in Melbourne and Sydney are appalling. But we got the good news last night that they've axed the Drum. Now, I can put my hand on my heart and say I've never seen an episode of The Drum.
Oh, what, Steve?
Not once.
Let me fill you in on it.
I was reminded that it used to be quite good, but it has fallen on hard times. Let
me fill you in because I watch The Drum quite regularly. I watch a lot of ABC. I consume a lot of it.
By choice?
But it's part of my job, Steve, so that we know what is going on for the taxpayer-funded broadcaster. But they have a panel every night and they discuss the issues of the day, and it's always heavily skewed left. You are struggling to find a person on the right side of politics, a conservative voice. Up until the Voice campaign, they were basically running, in my view, a strong campaign for the yes vote. Yep. So they're all, very upset this show's been axed. Now, Steve, I will say we don't wish people losing their jobs in any industry, but that show was really disgraceful. I was talking about this yesterday. Steve, on the episode this week, they were talking about if it offends you when people crunch when they eat apples and carrots and things. That's the sort of inane content they're pushing out. It's any wonder their ratings are down.
What are they going to replace it with?
Well, we don't know that yet. We think they're going to shift something they've already got into that 6 p.m. slot. But I suggest to our viewers or the viewers of that show, come over and watch Sky News.
Well, exactly. That's what they should be doing. But the ABC is a strange animal in that, it runs this national bulletin now on the main channel, which I think ABC should be local. So they're running a local radio recipe where everything has to be local, and yet on the main ABC television network, they're going national. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Well, there's an issue across their TV, particularly their radio arm. They're in damage control. They've made numerous changes across their radio arm. But basically, Steve, it's just shuffling seats. They never inject new blood. They've just lost Tom Switzer and Amanda Vanstone. Whether you'd argue Amanda Vanstone's conservative or not, that's another issue. But they've lost, on the right side of politics. They don't have any real conservative, right-leaning voices on the ABC. And I think it's a problem. This is why they're losing audiences, because it's so groupthink stacked to the left. It's not what Australians want.
And their demographic is an older Australian demographic anyway, and they certainly don't want that left-leaning vote yes, green agenda shoved down their throat. I tried to watch on iView the 7:30 report the last couple of nights. I mean, that's fallen on hard times. That is a dreadful program now.
Well, we saw Laura Tingle on there the other night, you know, interviewing Mark Dreyfus. The big story of the day was the way he treated Olivia Caisley, the Sky reporter, didn't mention it. This is the sort of interviewing you have at the ABC, and I think they just need to inject new blood and stop being run by this collective at the top, these, you know, activist journalists. They need to get more mainstream journalists in there, shake the whole place up. We're about to see Ita Buttrose leave in March. They're yet to announce the new chair, so time will tell. Good
luck trying to fix that culture. Sophie Ellsworth, thanks for being with us. It's always great to catch up with you. Now, after the break, Usman Khawaja, I told you there's some breaking news on this. I think he's been forced now to back down over those plans to show his support for Palestine. When will sports stars learn politics and sport do not mix? Welcome back. Steve Price in for Andrew Bolt. Now, you have to ask, athletes, movie stars getting involved in politics, I mean, seriously, do we care what their attitudes are to most issues? Now, the Australian newspaper broke a story this morning that cricketer Usman Khawaja, fantastic sportsman that he is, he was going to daub his cricket boots with messages in support of Palestine. Now, late today, it appears that he's been forced to abandon those plans to wear those boots of showing support for Palestine in the first test against Pakistan, which starts in Perth tomorrow. The shoes, and we've shown you the images of them there, have slogans, freedom is a human right and all lives are equal in the colours of the Palestinian flag. Now, Usman is the first Muslim to play Test cricket for Australia. Now, Cricket Australia apparently have told him he's not allowed to wear the shoes, and the International Cricket Commission, the ICC, have also said that that's not able to be done. Usman has spoken out about the decision. Here's what he's had to say on social media.
The ICC have told me that I can't wear my shoes on field because they believe it's a political statement under their guidelines. I don't believe it is so. It's a humanitarian appeal. I will respect their view and decision, but I will fight it and seek to gain approval.
Well, that's his explanation. Joining me now is Sky News contributor Evelyn Ray and Alexander Volz, contributor to skynews.com.au and writer for The Spectator. Now, Evelyn, we saw the explanation there. That's the first time I've seen that. Apparently, Pat Cummins, the captain, he also had a word about this today. Let's have a listen to what the captain said.
I think it's one of our strongest points, our team, is that everyone has their own passionate views and individual thoughts, and chatted to Uzi briefly about it today, and I don't think his intention is to make too big of a fuss, but we support him.
Do you expect him to wear the shoes out there tomorrow?
I spoke to him just quickly. He said he won't be. He won't be, but Uzi doesn't want to make too big of a fuss. I think his shoes, he had all lives are equal. I think that's not very divisive. I don't think anyone can really have too many complaints about that.
Evelyn, I think the right decision has been made, but why does sports people feel the need to impose their personal views on the contest? It's fine if you do it on the weekend or on a day off, or you can go and march wherever you like, but surely not on the cricket pitch itself.
You would think so, but they like to ruin all good things. I think most people go to watch sport to escape from the politics, to escape from the divisiveness, but you can't escape it in this country. And you know what? We are a multicultural society. That is what Australia is. So that doesn't mean that you just get a range of exotic meals, that you get spices imported. What that means is that you're going to have lots of different people with different backgrounds, with different religions, and some of those things is what fuels international war. And that's what we're seeing play out now. So it shouldn't really be a surprise that in Australia you're going to have people from varying backgrounds, from varying religions that are going to align one way or another. But you know what? I think we have to point out the striking hypocrisy here, because I think it was only last year or the year before that the Australian cricket team got calluses on their knees from bowing down to the Black Lives Matter. So this whole thing about them not wanting to be divisive, not wanting to do politics and make statements, I think is a complete sham, because clearly they do take a stance when it comes to some sort of political ideologies. The difference with this one is that the political stance that this particular cricketer is taking is not one that they deem an acceptable one, and I think that we should at least call out the hypocrisy.
Alexander, it's also a national team that had a problem with a major sponsor, which turned out to be a mining company. So they've got a bit of a record, haven't they?
Well, that's the first I'm hearing of it, Steve, but I'm sure that they probably do. Look, thank goodness their cricketers are not geopoliticians. That's all I'll say. And, you know, when is it going to be the point where the Australian people stand up and, stop buying tickets to sports? I mean, it's a hard thing, isn't it? In this country, we love our sport, and we wonder when our sports players will stop subjecting us to politics. But maybe that actually requires some discipline for us to temporarily give up what we love and say enough is enough. I really do think that this commercialism, this is really driving the public debate. And if we don't, stop buying tickets to these sporting events, I just don't really know how else they're going to get the message. The Australian Open is coming up, Steve, and they're charging a discounted ticket rate for Indigenous Australians. Everyone else, just because of the colour of their skin, has to pay more. And if you're not okay with that, maybe you just don't go to the Australian Open this year.
Evelyn, talking about Australian tradition, Surf Lifesaving Australia, I mean, there could be no more Aussie thing than surf lifesavers at the beach. Well, apparently the woke police have now got their sights on lifesavers. They put out new draft guidelines which instruct members to, quote, retrain your brain to avoid calling people by their biological gender. What are these people on about?
Look, we definitely need to retrain our brain, but we need to retrain our brain to not think like they're people who are writing whatever these surf lifesavers are supposed to be doing. Imagine at that crucial moment of thinking to ensure a person isn't going to die, you have to be distracted with the thoughts of, am I going to lose my job over this? Am I going to get into trouble for something that I say? And a few seconds can mean the difference between life and death. As a former frontline worker myself, I can say this with absolute certainty that it can be moments that can ensure a person lives or a person dies. What we are talking about here is ridiculously dangerous. The entire thing should be mocked. I'm going to bring back public mocking. We shouldn't tolerate it. We shouldn't even accommodate ideas that could cause the loss of lives. This is enough is enough.
Alexander, the other thing about this, of course, is that many of the lifesavers that patrol our beaches, and famously, of course, our ex-Prime Minister Tony Abbott, they're volunteers. I mean, do you really want to give up your weekend and volunteer to patrol a dangerous beach wearing a lifesaving uniform and then be lectured about where you can go to the bathroom and who you can call he and she? I mean, seriously.
Well, I think that's right, Steve. You know, you've sort of got to wonder what David Hasselhoff would think of all this. Maybe David Hasselhoff is a sign of toxic masculinity these days. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I think Evelyn's on to something here. There's going to be a circumstance where a lifesaver, or indeed just a medical professional, is going to need to know the biological gender of a person. They're going to need to have that data available to them. And it could be life-threatening if they don't get it. So the whole thing should be mocked. I think that's right. There are biological realities. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. When I see a man give birth, maybe I'll reconsider my opinion.
We're all in furious agreement. Evelyn Rae, Alexander Volz, thank you very much for your time tonight. Coming up after the break, a major win for Rishi Sunak and his immigration bill, but he's nowhere near out of trouble just yet. The latest from the UK right after this. The UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is back from COP28, as is King Charles and David Cameron. They were all there on separate planes, apparently. Well, he's managed to get the UK PM his Rwanda bill to pass its first vote in the House of Commons on Tuesday, today. Now, he's nowhere near out of trouble, though, after more than 24 Tory right-wingers abstained in the vote, including former Home Secretary Suella Braverman. Joining me now from London is GB News host, the great Patrick Christys. Can you explain for us first, Patrick, exactly what this Rwanda bill is?
Yes, absolutely. So we have boat people coming across the English Channel to the tune of about 100,000 over the last couple of years. And at the moment, our laws are so weak that we can't deport any of these people, even if really it turns out that they are criminals or deviants, etc. So the Rwanda bill is an opportunity to get them processed in a third country, a safe country, Rwanda, and then they can go and live there if they are found to be genuine asylum seekers, take the pressure off our public services. But alas, that has not worked, as you were alluding to there. The Tory rebels blinked last night. They didn't vote against this new Rwanda policy, which is not tight enough, really. So it will be held up in the courts and planes will not be taken off. And as a result, they're being called things like bottle jobs and cowards, really. And the British public are the big losers.
Well, we went through this ourselves, as you know. I mean, when we had an influx of boat people out of Indonesia, I mean, we, under John Howard, as strong as John Howard was, we decided that we would send people offshore to Nauru or to Papua New Guinea. And indeed, at one point, there was even some sort of deal going to be done with Malaysia and New Zealand. So it's been done in other places of the world. Why has the UK, under the Sunak government, found it so difficult to get people to realise that this is a smart thing to do?
Yeah, so they are flat out refusing to turn the boats back, which everybody with eyes in their head can see is the quickest and easiest way of stopping this massive drain on public resources. We're spending £8 million, British pounds, a day on hotels for these people whilst we have our own issues in this country. And the fact is, we have already sent the Rwandan government now a couple of £100 million. More is on the way. We are paying for people that we can't send to them. And it is turning into one of those kind of African phone line cons where someone calls you, fleeces you out of a load of money, and then essentially holds you to ransom. Because Rwanda is saying now, if we make this bill any tougher, i.e. so tough that it will actually lead to people being deported to Rwanda, then they will pull out of it. So we are essentially being held to ransom on human rights by an African country that had a massive civil war there not so long ago. But really, this is a fault all of our own making, and it is a problem of leadership.
Well, speaking of leadership, Labor leader Keir Starmer has demanded that they have an immediate general election if the bill fails. That's not going to happen. What's Labor's view on how to fix the illegal immigrant problem?
Yeah, well, the Labour Party always has a massive question mark over its head about whether or not they care about illegal immigration. There is clearly that trope that the Labour Party are happy to open the borders because what they see coming in are future Labour voters. And so actually they're all right doing that. The Labour Party is saying wishy-washy things like, we'll smash the human trafficking gangs. Well, all right, but how are you going to do that? Because I don't think our Labour leader is going to send in our special forces to rampage across Europe and start taking out people who are part of these human trafficking gangs. They are saying that they will pull the Rwanda bill, so we wouldn't even really have a deterrent there at all. The problem at the moment is that the Tories, the Conservative government, has just been so ineffective and so useless that the Labour Party doesn't really have to say anything. But yeah, I mean, the Labour Party is just looking at the Conservative Party now and saying, well, how could we be any worse? And, you know, the reality is they could be worse, but I suppose that would just mean the end for Britain as we know it, which is not a particularly appealing prospect.
Patrick, let's talk about another couple of refugees, Prince Harry and Meghan. Apparently, tax filings have revealed that those expats, the Archewell Foundation, has spiralled into the red and suffered a donations plunge of 17 million Australian dollars in 1 year. Have people finally woken up to these two grifters?
Yeah, they absolutely have. And some of these accounts are very revealing. So the executive director, who is widely believed to be one of Prince Harry's best friends, received a 280% pay rise, reportedly, off the back of all of this. And apparently their donations dipped to just over £1.6 million. That's a plunge of around £8.7 million in 2021. And it does raise serious questions, doesn't it, about how people with that profile who are claiming to do such great charity work, they released a glitzy promotional video for their charity, by the way, just a couple of days ago, how they can raise such little money. I think if you and I went outside right now and rattled the can a bit, if we did that long enough, we could probably raise a similar amount of money. But I think people are waking up to their grift, and it raises serious questions, really, about what are they actually doing charity-wise? What work have we seen them doing? They left the royal family to find freedom. I mean, they initially found quite a lot of money through Netflix and Spotify, but what good have they actually done for the world? I mean, not a lot, really. I mean, in a world of Hollywood fakery, they are now right at the top, which is quite an achievement.
And please tell me no one's buying that book about the racism.
Yeah, the sales absolutely plummeted. There were more copies of The Big Issue sold, which is a magazine that we have over here that homeless people hand out outside the London Underground. I don't know if you have it over there. Than Omid Scobie's book, which may or may not have revealed these royal racists, so-called racists. I don't think they are, but there we go. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
No one's going to buy it here. No one's buying it here, Patrick, I can tell you, and congratulations on having such great taste. Good to catch up with you, Patrick Christie's there. Chris Kenny's coming up next. I'll be back tomorrow night.